but one of the reasons I've been really uber reluctant to use anything that is cloud-based when it comes to my writing and stuff like this is because the IP, it gets really suspicious about who owns that IP then, simply because once you put it into a collective environment like that, they have rights within their document that say, we have rights to use whatever you're putting up here. And so this is where my caution comes in about, yeah, that kind of thing is really useful, but there's a trade-off cost to it, and it's the trade-off that
Yeah, what's convenience versus cost, right? No, that's I mean that's always a good conversation to have. In terms of like GitHub and GitLab, they're some of the more trusted platforms that I think, and the reason is because you ask, well, where's their money being made, right? With Google, it's strange, right? Because Google, like, you never pay Google for anything, but somehow they're providing half the internet, right? Well, they make money off advertising, so you know where you're the product, right? I mean, that's basically what it is, which you have to be aware of, right? From a GitLab or GitHub, how do they make money? Well, they actually do a pretty good business, and it's not from people like you and me. It's from, well, people like me who pay GitLab for build minutes, for enterprise accounts, for all the CI/CD tools that we're going to cover in a few weeks, and all of the basically these massive tool sets that they have. If you're using the free version, it's fine. I mean, one, they don't care enough. That's the other thing is like what are they really gonna what are they gonna do with some of my Medium articles or something, which I'm gonna publish anyways, right? It's kind of like, yeah, what's the risk? What IP do I actually have that's actually worth it to a GitLab? Nothing in their end user license agreement says they can go and give it to anyone else. So even if they have access to it, which we know they do because we're all developers here, right? We know they're in databases and stuff, and they're not hashed, right? So technically a developer has access to that if they need to. What are the chances that someone's going to look at it, right? And if they do, are they going to care? Probably not. And if they do care, do I care that they care? Yeah, cool. Someone's reading it, right? So I mean, when it comes down to
there
it,
is that.
you kind of gotta take the bad with the good too, and just be realistic about what you're putting in. Now, if you have the secret recipe to warp drive, yeah, maybe not put it on GitLab, right? But if you're writing an academic paper that you're going to publish, it's kind of like, well, it's going to be published anyways. And it's not like, IEEE, as soon as I publish it in IEEE, they somehow have everything and they can sell it and never give me any money for it, right? So, I mean, it's the same. It's the same thing.
But you as Technicity and Modesto, do you get, so because you're using enough of it, you use those services? So my assumption is for any of us that would start working as a full stack development engineer, we're not likely going to be working on our own. We're likely going to be working for an organization that, even if it's a small startup, that is using or providing these kinds of tools.
Yep.
And if they're not providing these kinds of tools, then we ought to be kind of skeptical of going to work for an organization that would say, yeah, you just have to do this all on your own. I mean, that you could be a contract and just do it for them.
Yeah, I mean, so we're split. Like at Technicity Modesto, we kind of give people an option. Like if you're a good company person, then yeah, like we'll provide you a computer. Honestly, no one has ever told me that they want me to buy them a computer.
Oh, I didn't mean the hardware. I just meant that they would say, these are the tools.
Well, right. I'm talking about hardware, software, whatever. It's kind of like what, and that's what we do at Modesto. I'm using computer as an example, but also the tools. Yeah, I'll be somewhat persuasive. If someone does, wants to use something other than like VS Code,
I was just thinking that.
I'll be somewhat persuasive, but frankly, if they're productive and they're getting stuff done, I don't care. And that's why he's still using whatever he uses.
Yeah.
So, I mean, it's really, plus that's also why we educate our full stack engineers, right? Because in the end, if you educate them, then they're going to use the tools that you
Well, it's actually really funny to listen to you talk when you talked last week about authentication and security and all of that stuff. And the server that was set up for my data by a person who shall remain nameless, he simply moves it around every time. So it's not in a secure. It's just the IP address changes on a kind of weekly basis.
Yeah.
So and it has all these things that it pop up and say, this is not a secure site. You should not be using this. Don't go any further. And I'm like, oh yeah, no, go ahead. I'm okay. Go ahead. Because I know what's on the other end of it. But it's just kind of funny because the first time this happened, when I was going through this, I'm like, really? And he's like, oh yeah, this is the most secure way of doing this. And I'm like, okay, sure it is. You know, it's like, it's got a double authentication and nobody can find it. But I'm like, but there's no, I mean, it's like not secure from the,
In my world, we call that security through obscurity.
yeah, exactly.
And it's not secure.
Oh, I know that. Yeah. I got it.
But yeah, so I mean that's what it comes down to is if you have a better tool, tell me about it because I want to use it, right? I mean that's kind of how we operate. So if you got something better, by all means, let us know because we're always looking for something better. We've just probably found the things we like to use, right, JC? I mean, well, just this morning you were like, "Hey, I found something better than Redis." I'm like, yeah, right." But it looks kind of cool, that key store thing.
Yeah, something to keep an eye on,
Yeah.
right? We're always looking out for new tools.
Yeah, we're always like
and-
slacking links to each other and stuff about new stuff.
I mean, if you're in the camp of really not wanting to trust anybody to, I guess, see your Git repos, for example. I mean, technically, Git is a piece of software just like Linux. It's completely open source, and you can set up your own Git server if you want, and you can use that as your remote and push and pull to it. Like you could go set up a server in your basement or maybe purchase one from DigitalOcean, but then you'd have to trust them, right? Which I would say you probably should, but yeah, I mean, you don't have to necessarily use GitLab or GitHub in order to use Git. Right. I mean, you can set up your own Git server. Now that doesn't come with the interface. I think doesn't GitLab actually have an interface that they provide that you could spin up at your own instance, right?
Our first boot camp was run on a Technicity GitLab. I actually ran for years. I ran our own stuff on a DigitalOcean server, our own GitLab, self-hosted. It's called because GitLab's open sources their entire thing, and it looked exactly the same as the primary GitLab. The reason we switched is because the CI/CD is so good, which I pay for. So, you know, I mean, it was harder and more work to just do that self-hosted. So, if you're really concerned, it's a good point from JC is, geez, well, if you're really that concerned, boot up a DigitalOcean server and you know, pay the $40 a month or whatever it's going to cost to run the self-hosted GitLab. And install GitLab. It's literally a Ruby script, and it'll do it in one line, and it'll even install the SSL certs for you. And it's pretty easy. So if you're that concerned, yeah. But then again, you could say, oh, geez, well, can't the people at DigitalOcean see it? I mean, I guess maybe. Then okay, then buy your own Linux server, set up in your basement, and do it. You know?
Yeah, you want to go there, right?
Can't your ISP find that? And then it's like, well, why don't you just dig yourself a hole, build yourself a steel wall around it, and never come out, and then you'll be.
Yeah, listen, you mock me, and I try doing that. It doesn't work. If I could get away with it, I would do it. But no, it's just. Go ahead.
Sorry, I was gonna say, didn't the Pentagon trust Amazon?
That's true. The Pentagon trusts Amazon. The JEDI contract was awarded to GCP, I think, right?
See, they don't actually read the contract.
Or
they don't ever read the contract. They don't know what they're giving away. Like, it's like, sure, we'll trust you. Because we can blow you away if we need to. Like that. No, I think for me, it's a lot of it is just it's just the way that I was trained to be secure when computers first started. So a lot of the tools that now exist were not there so the mentality that I have is you keep your stuff as much of it is away from, like, separated from everyone else, and you make sure you back everything up a couple of, 3 or 4 times. I don't use the cloud, but that's just because I just don't trust it. But that, I don't think there's anything that's going to make me, I eventually will have to learn to trust it. I just don't trust it yet.
Okay, boomer.
Yeah, no, I'm not a boomer. Not yet.
Which is why I can say it. So
Yeah, no, but that's the thing, is it's just a mentality that says, oh, you protect yourself by isolating what you are doing, as opposed to saying, oh, okay, these tools exist. I can I remember our IT person essentially saying to me, look, you ought to trust the cloud because they have more security around their system than you have at your house. So but they're also more vulnerable because someone's more likely to go after them than they are to go after your individual connection.
And did you say I don't even use a smartphone? And they're probably, well, we can't help you.
After I say that, it's amazing what people just start backing up slowly, and it really is amazing how effective that is. I have stunned students into silence with pulling out my cell phone.
Oh, geez.
Yep.
It's funny because I have these conversations every so often with my dad, who's he's a stodule professor, and from the old days, electrical engineer, and he's always like incredulous when I tell him, I describe open source software, and it's funny in my mind. I see his point, but I can usually get him by saying that he's always like, why would you just put out your IP like that? Like, you put a lot of work into it. Why would you just publish it to everyone, right? It's changing topics a little bit, but it's kind of along the same lines, right? Is truly open source, right? There's so much code that we use. In fact, through this entire boot camp, we use code that's just free, right? Amazing, and it's very powerful, right? People have put their heart and soul into these things, and it's just free. Why do people do that? Well, there's a couple reasons that I always give them. And I never win these conversations because, well, it's not possible. But the first argument is, well, software changes so rapidly that the minute you put it out, it's good. But guess what? It has such a short lifespan that there's really no IP associated with it. And guess what? It's your personal IP. And this leads into my second point, which is always an interesting point, particularly for academics. And that is, well, what you're doing is the actual code that you're writing and letting other people use, there's no value in that. What you're doing is you're building value for yourself because you're the one who knows how to maintain it and you're the creator of it. So it's actually your reputation you're doing, which is why I'm very supportive of open source for all of the technicity developers. I think everyone should do it because it just builds your own brand. That's important. But and then he's like, but you're just giving it away for free. And I said, well, you give away crap for free all the time. You publish papers. And guess what? At least in open source, no one's profiting off of that. They could, but indirectly. Guess what? IEEE is profiting off it directly. They are literally selling your paper and you're getting nothing for it. So it's kind of an interesting, it's the same thing. It's all reputation, right? And that's the way. That's why we serve on standards bodies, right? For those of you who have sat through those awful standards committees, right, in automotive and everything, it's the same reason we do that, right? We don't do it for the betterment of anything. We do it for reputation. We do it for our personal brand and to learn more, right? That's why people are there. The same thing goes for open source. And that's why people are like, man, what is open source? Why is it there? We have the same problems. We can't get people to do open source or maintain it for the same reason you can't get good people to sit on steering committees and open and standards bodies. It's the same reason. It's the same thing, but we have it in all fields. I don't know why there's this weird disbelief as to why software engineers would do this and put all this stuff out, and it's very clear to me.
But it's awesome. I love open source. I love it. I love Linux. I would be happy to live in that world.
Yep.
Which is where I live when I do my work. My research is all, I have you know, I tell my students
Papers
that,
up on GitLab?
yeah, well, actually, I'd like to figure out, I had thought about doing a website to put my papers up. I'm trying to figure out where I can put them that I'm allowed to put them. Because that's my intention, is to, that's one of the things I'm going to do out of this, which is to figure out how can I create a site that I own so I'm allowed to put those. But I mean, I spend a lot of time, which you already know, BJ, big data. And I mean, I have terabytes and terabytes of data that I use and I manage and I work with because of open source stuff. So although I don't use a smartphone, I absolutely use the programs that are available in order to be able to do data mining.
Oh yeah.
So
no, open source is an incredible thing, and quite frankly, it helps us move, you know, forward from on a technology perspective.
But I think one of the things you did say last week really was informative to me. You said that 60 to 70% of all website visits are through mobile.
Yep.
Which means that we have to kind of, at least as back end, or whether we're going to do front end, understand that we have to interface. That has to be the interface. Yep. Is understanding that people are communicating and getting information from us through their mobile devices, not by sitting at a laptop or a tablet or something, you know. And that was interesting when you went through showing how you would design a site differently for a mobile device versus a desktop. I actually found that very helpful because I never think about except the device that I use.
Right.
So if I use a desktop all of the time, I don't think about how would this look on a mobile, and how could you, the other thing I thought was interesting was to have you show us, you can design it through CSS in a way that says, look, it will change depending on what the screen input is. Right.
Yeah, that's a interesting thing. In fact, I think even our team at Technicity doesn't do a good enough job, and I'm speaking maybe for everybody. Maybe others do, I don't. And that is, we actually still think of desktop first because we're on desktops all the time. You know, we're always thinking of that as opposed to being mobile first. I mean, I have to make a really conscious effort to do that. With that said, I think it's natural to do that because of the fact that it's easy. I just read this somewhere, like literally like an hour ago in an article or something. It's easier to start. Yeah, it was a Webflow article. It's easier to start big and go down as opposed to start little, right, and go big. Because you're putting in more and more information on the big thing, right? But if you're starting little, you're more likely going to leave off important user experience elements. And so if you start big and then design down, you tend to incorporate and think about everything from an experience standpoint, and then the exercise of going down smaller allows you to figure out what's important and what's not, right? And so it's kind of like everything in kitchen sink big, like that provisional patent, right? And then you get it down to just your list of claims that are really critical for the mobile, right? If we're the analogy of writing a patent. So I think from that perspective, it's really kind of I think it's natural for us to start big because we're always on desktop and then going down. But honestly, sometimes, you know, particularly when you're doing like landing pages and stuff, which are a drag, I hate those things. We tend to do desktop first because they're beautiful, they're big, they're in your face, they're fun to kind of look at. And then it's always an afterthought like, oh crap, I got to make this look on mobile. And as it turns out, like 70% of all people are going to be looking at this on mobile. So why did I just spend a bunch of time on desktop, right? But that's why we work with design firms and stuff like that too, because they'll take care of that, right? Right, JC?
Right. So, and on top of that, a interface that's getting more and more common these days is voice, right?
Yeah, Alexa, Google Home. Right. Hey, Google, did I get him to talk behind you, JC, or is he not in the same room?
No, it's far away.
Okay.
So how does that change how you think about as developers? How does the fact that voice is the interaction change the calculations that you're making.
I would say that you have to be able to narrow your vocabulary, right? So if you think about it, it's quite hard to articulate something very specific through language and not have it feel really contrived. Like if you want the like rear left burner on your stove to turn on at say 50%, and think about coming up with a phrase for that, right? And so that makes sense in spoken language, but then when you try to translate that to typically the way that NLP software works is on intents, it becomes a little bit more complicated, especially if that's simple because most homes have, say, one stove, right? But what do you do when maybe you have four of them? Right? Do you start speaking Uids? Like, I mean, it's
Ask my wife about turning on our master fan in the bedroom. Because it's such a sequence of words that it needs to be more adaptive, right? To understand so that you don't have to pattern it so much.
Right.
And yeah, I think that's definitely like a area of ongoing development, right? And like how do you make these things somewhat intuitive?
So one of the questions I have is,
I'll finish that thought because we struggled a lot with smart glass because one of our big enterprise clients is smart glass. Smart glass being it turns opaque and clear depending on uh, basically based on a signal, IoT signal, and it's liquid crystal is how it works. But we went through a lot, right, JC? I mean, we went through a significant amount of work to figure out, geez, what exact words, and then you're also putting in like multiple different phrases, and it's kind of like, hey, turn. What was it? Turn private or turn clear? Because there's a whole user experience thing too. Just in English, that's a really awkward thing to say. Hey, turn private. That can be pretty awkward. But then it's kind of like, hey, turn on, turn off. Well, you're not really turning glass on and off, right? So, what do you say, right? Like, how do you even describe that for this new smart home product that is natural to use, right? It's a privacy product, but I mean, how do you even interface with it from a language perspective? And so, there's even challenges before the user experience challenge, even before you get to, oh, what if I have multiple glass in multiple rooms, right? How do I interface with that? So now when we're actually designing products, I don't particularly think it's changing much right now, because it's still not used. I mean, it's definitely a consideration, but it's still not quite used in mainstream yet. And not that Alexas and Google Homes aren't around, because they are everywhere, but in the systems and stuff that we typically use in a big way, particularly when you're talking about factory automation, industrial IoT, things like that, where people are actually willing to spend money in IoT, you're not seeing a lot of voice yet. And frankly, it's because, like in factories, it's not possible. It's loud. It's hard to do. There's a lot of people. Voice selection is not quite figured out yet, so you can't really. There's no security in that strategy, and quite frankly, it's not quite natural, right? Particularly in a corporate setting. Like imagine you walk into a boardroom, right, and you say, "Hey Alexa, turn on the projector," right, or something like that. You don't see that, and the reason is because it's the same thing that JC just said. How's that natural, right? Turn on the projector. How do you know to even say that? Why couldn't it be turn on the room or pull down the Alexa, pull down the projector screen, things like that. Like how do you? You almost have to post like signs around the room to say something when it's just as easy to walk up and press the button on the wall, right? It's even easier, right? So I mean,
or just to check that somebody's in there and turn on.
Well, yeah, exactly. It's just motion sensor, right?
Yeah, just motion sense and prepare everything. It's like.
So I mean, there's just so much of that kind of stuff. A lot of it's just over-engineered. With that said, the voice stuff's really great for music. Like the stuff I use it for, right, is music is really nice, particularly for my 2-year-old. Constantly, even just today, she was for the first time, she has enough language to be able to actuate Alexa, which is unfortunate. Now she's going to be doing it all the time, right?
You're screwed now.
Yeah. So, I mean, so like music, controlling the lights and stuff, like that's great. But beyond that, there's not much use. I struggle finding things that it's, not cumbersome, even if you're used to it, to really get over it. It's just not there yet.
Has the natural language processing gotten to be really good now? Like, do most systems,
In
can
some
you just,
in some ways, yes. Natural language text has gotten really good, like really, really good. I mean, you to the point of you can generate full academic papers and pass a peer review kind
right?
of thing, right? We hear horror stories of that all the time. Really structured. Even social media, they're very effective. I mean, most of the divisive things we see on social media, and those types of things, from the left and right just firing across each other, right? Most of that stuff is actually generated via NLP, just based on really divisive types of political comments and things. Most of that is bots and NLP, surprisingly. So we're really good at generating those types of stuff. I mean, just look at deep fakes. We're amazing at that kind of stuff. Um, Now, when we get to spoken text, not so good. It's still really difficult, and the reason is you can think about it, right? The accents, just the nuance. We speak a lot different than we write. And in fact, it's gotten worse and worse with texting and Slack and everything because the way we talk on Slack is totally different than how we're talking right now. Totally different. And so I think that's what makes it so difficult. Not to mention the dialects and all this kind of stuff. It took my 2 year old a long time to get. She tried, like she was talking. She did the same comment every, like, and she must have done it like 20 times before it even got close to even getting the wake word, right? But she was determined because she saw us doing it. So like they can learn, but it takes a significant amount. Of course, she can only ask it to do one thing, specifically, is it raining? Alexa, is it raining? Right? And she can only do that one thing because we Alexa was saying it was raining when it wasn't. So of course we asked it one number of times. And so like it's those types of things, but like she couldn't possibly ask it for music. Like her language isn't good enough. She's two. She has
Oh,
a
wait,
vocabulary and stuff.
6 months. 6 months, she's going to be ordering packages and like
Right, yeah.
asking for whatever she wants.
But fortunately, I have a whole VPN and everything that's selectively doing my own natural language processing to make sure that only the stuff I want gets out to Amazon. But I mean, the thing is, like, yeah, I mean, NLP is there if you're talking about text and processing, like very structured text, right? The stuff that we do in our research, Beth Ann, text analytics and things, very, very good. Not very
Yeah,
good.
no, I'm actually just trying to figure out when the stuff that I do is going to be that a machine can do it so much better than I can do it, like with the text, because I think I'd
Context.
like to think that I'm irreplaceable in terms of the analysis, but I'm not. I'm skeptical that some processor won't be able to come in and essentially be able to analyze things.
How
I
many,
just don't think it's the concepts.
how many of you guys have heard about low code? You heard about this buzzword, low code, in the office or anything? So there's this perpetual thing. It started, I think, probably in the 80s, 70s or 80s in computing. They called it low code, and it's like the holy grail. It's basically any non-technical person can basically develop an application, and basically with no code, low code. That's the thing, right? And every so often you'll see these big acquisitions happen or these big IPOs happen for these startups that have the next low code or no code platform. It's basically click, like drag and drop, click, and make an app or something, right? They always fall flat on their face because talk about the best way to stifle innovation, right? Just make something that is just plug and play, right? So we're always trying to push the limits. So low code, no code doesn't work. But JC had a really good saying. and I have not heard anyone else say this, but I steal it now, so I make sure everyone thinks it's mine. And that was low code or no code is always someone else's code, right? So if you take that approach, if you're like, oh, I wonder when the AI is going to replace me as a developer. I wonder if when the AI is going to replace me as a data scientist. Yeah, no, that's not going to happen because someone's low code or no code is someone else's code, right? So I mean, it's always going to be there, regardless of even if we get to a piano player, Kurt Vonnegut piano player type situation, where you have the high end people who just use, and then the entire middle class is just machines, and then you have the lower end people repairing the machines, right? All the low SES repairing the machines. You're still going to have it's always someone's problem, right? And so we'll never get there. I don't care how much artificial intelligence we have. We'll never get there unless we get to like
Most levels of programming abstraction, I mean, are take away things that people really don't enjoy doing anyway. Right. I mean, if you think about it, like we don't deal with memory management with JavaScript or Python, for example, and I would say most people would enjoy not having to deal with that.
I'd love to not have to gather data.
Yeah, well,
The bane of my existence, and BJ's tried to help me with this numerous times to create a web scraper that will actually just go in and get the data I want. And I cannot, there is no way. It's still manual. Like it's manually assisted by a computer, but it's just the decision-making process.
Oh, can you mturk it?
No, don't even go there. Trust me, it's more venting than anything else.
You could.
This sounds like a JavaScript project.
That's what I'm going to work on. No, I've got it.
I mean,
legit, yes.
No, it's a legit project.
On a research project that uses like Mechanical Turk?
Yeah, I mean, Mechanical Turk is one thing that you could consider that for that, Beth Ann. Have you heard of Mechanical Turk?
I've heard of it, but I don't know what it is. Like I've heard that term, but I can't place it in my head. So,
JC, you brought it up. You can explain it.
Yeah, I've actually played around, done some of their assignments just to see like what it's like. So that in Mechanical Turk, it's like a branch of Amazon, and I think he came up with the name because like historically, Mechanical Turk was this guy who went around Europe, beating all of these chess masters back in the day, and it was quote unquote a machine, right? And they had like a puppet, and the puppet would move around these chess pieces, and people, I think Napoleon was one of the people who was actually beat by this Mechanical Turk. And so what it happened to be was there was actually a chess master, one of like the greatest chess masters of the time, who was hidden inside of the box that this puppet was sitting at, moving around. And he was actually like moving around these little levers, and he could see from within the box where the pieces were being played. And so the whole reason that this thing gets that name is because it seems like a machine, but really what it is you actually create micro tasks. And so you can submit these jobs to Mechanical Turk where you actually come up with essentially, say, like an HTML form that somebody has to fill out. And then you provide maybe, 100, 1,000 links for them to go through and do web scraping for you, essentially. I mean, it could be all kinds of things. There's like jobs in there for labeling images, for doing image recognition, training models like that, right? And it all depends on like what characteristics of the worker that you need to satisfy, but you set your rates. You say, look, I pay
yeah, that's how I know it.
Yeah, 10 cents for 100 data points, or whatever you want to spec it at. But yeah, they in terms of jobs where you really do need a human at some level, but it's something that can be done in sort of like a mass-produced way. It actually really is a good option. You just have to have the know-how on how to actually pipe everything. And the neat thing is with Mechanical Turk, if you know what you're doing, they have a full API that you can leverage, REST API.
Yeah, it's I've used it a couple times to actually like commission jobs for like data labeling and stuff. It's one of those that you get out of it what you put into it, right? I mean, it's like anything. It's like you never give a graduate student no direction and expect them to get a thesis out of it, right?
Yeah.
It's you get out of it what you put into it. So if you really do a lot of specification and everything, you can get some really good data. But if you don't put any effort into it, then yeah, expect crap.
Now I'm still, it's one of my projects to figure out how to automate some of this stuff. I mean, I just figured that's what I need to learn how to do, is how to automate what I can automate. And then it's like the spreadsheet. There's certain things you can say, yeah, I can automate this, and others that you just can't.
Yeah. I mean, there's
weren't the captchas like a really ingenious thing that were done? So the different captchas for defining whether or not you're a human, right? That was a big project where they scanned all kinds of books, and like the characters that you're identifying are actually have been going to some large database.
Yeah. Yeah.
I think I met the person who came up with that at one point at some conference. I remember meeting, and that was pardon?
Was it a Carnegie Mellon guy? I thought it was like the same guy. So I thought it was related to the guy who does Duolingo.
Yeah, I don't remember. I just remember somebody saying that was his claim to fame. And I went, okay. Good job. You're the one that annoys me.
So any other questions, guys? We've been really just kind of talking about everything and anything under the sun, but any specific questions? Which is cool. We can continue to keep talking. Beth Ann, there was something that you were going to ask at office hours.
Yeah, I was going to ask about what you did for getting better. That was one of the questions. But I had another question. I'm just looking to see, because I think most of them you've actually answered. I was going to ask about the copyright of images, which you actually answered. And then you talked about, which is actually very helpful, about the don't pick a project to start with that no one has ever done before. If you're going to improve. And I'm like, yeah, that's okay, that's hard. But I think those were essentially, I want to understand more which we'll probably get into, about the databases and the using the how you populate that, how you get stuff into that, or is that just essentially uploaded?
That's a good question.
Because we've talked a lot about how the data that how we get data into them.
Are you talking about like how do you prime a database, or like how do you even start with it? That's one of the more difficult things that we do. And honestly, I don't know if we have a good like one size fits all strategy for that. I'll tell you that it's a bit of a feeling call, I guess I'll say, as to how much you put directly into the SQL file as stuff. So like an example of this, right? Obviously, you don't write user accounts into SQL, right? You let your API deal with that. But let's say like roles, right? So let's say you're writing a system, and your system has specific user roles, like a super admin, a consumer, I don't know, like a driver, right? Like these are all different roles within the system, and you're gonna have a finite number, maybe 5 or something. We may choose to actually just insert those directly on a data model SQL load, because those will never change. And we'll just write those in so that the system has them when, from the very beginning and all this kind of stuff. The other thing that we'll do, which we didn't do in week 5, I think, which is the database stuff, was add to Mocha, right? Our test framework. Usually what we'll do is we'll add a first test at the very beginning, like a before clause in that Mocha test, and we will do a database load. So, and what will do is it'll clear the database and then reprime it. And then you basically write your test to load the database to set up your tests before then testing it through. Of course, when you're deploying, and we'll do this, of course, in the next couple weeks, when you're deploying, you only do that once. And so that's a very hands-on sort of thing. So that's, we set aside time as a team and we say, we're going to deploy today. There's usually one or two of us on it, if not three or four, depending on the size of the job. And, we just work it through. We say, all right, like, what do we have to load? What do we have to load up? What types of data need to be in there in order to start? We usually have to create accounts first for clients to, the client account stuff for the initial login, stuff like that. And that's usually just a team effort where we kind of do manually. At that point, you don't have to worry about it again, right? I mean, it's done. Of course, then there's the database, data model migrations and stuff like that when you have to update, which we'll go over. But from just an initial thing, it's kind of a gut call as to what you do in SQL and what you do in the
So the data management and the database, or the database management and the database cleaning, is that something that you do on a regular basis, or is there, I assume there's not a way to automate that, so to speak, to make sure that your data is actually, because I've seen all sorts of database that are just crap after a couple of years because it never gets clean. I mean, it just is, so it stops being good data that's in there. And I guess, I mean, if you have like the one we're doing right now, which is essentially vehicles, you could go in and say, okay, I want to make sure the vehicles are, and you can actually, I mean, there are ways of kind of ensuring that the data is good, but you could wind up with a bunch of data in a database that really is relevant when it goes in, but 2 years down the road, I mean, one of the databases I'm used to dealing with is addresses and people's information. Mm-hmm. And it's valid when it goes in, and 2 years later, it's no longer valid, but people are still using it and pulling from it.
So I'll say with probably 100% confidence that 99.9999999% of all large databases are dirty. It is very, very rare to find an actual clean database in the wild. They just don't exist. And the reason is because it's really hard. And that's what we strive for when we do data model design, is to make sure that we minimize that. You're always going to have dirty data. That's something you cannot avoid. But we try to minimize it by thinking about feature definition, feature engineering, and typing, and all those different things, right? Some of that exercise we went through about, we started with a vehicle, right? One table. And then a little bit later, we started introducing this concept of a normalized table, which is the vehicle make, so that we normalized that out. So we took it out of the vehicle table because that could very easily get dirty, right? Meaning anyone could put the make, and it could be capitalized, it could, no, not, all this kind of stuff. Then we said, well, we should probably do the same thing with the model, right? And so you start doing that, and then after a while, you get experienced enough to know where those pain points are. And then, particularly when you start doing machine learning and optimization, what types of parameters do you typically learn on and train on? Those types of things. And so let's design our database for that. And so you're starting to see some of that now that we're actually getting to a point professionally, or I guess just culturally within systems design, to know what that type of pattern is. But it's just starting, probably in the last year or so. Before, I guess we were a bit ahead of our time, like especially with like health QRS and stuff, which is very clean. But the idea is that before, you'd have these very large databases in large enterprises. Startups, not so much, because startups don't have a lot of data. I mean, that's generally what it is. I mean, unless you still count, Uber and Google as a startup, or Facebook, they're not startups, right? But really large enterprises, they have dirty data. And that's why when you hear someone like a data scientist who has a undergraduate business degree say, I do machine learning and data science. No, you don't. You spend 99% of your time cleaning data. That's what you do. And when you hear someone who's like, I'm a data scientist, oh, what do you spend most of your time on? The answer is always, if they're being honest, oh, I'm just cleaning Excel spreadsheets because that's the job. Because there's so much dirty data out there that it needs to be cleaned. And that's why the majority of data science and why it's so difficult for us to uh, make really good founded analytical decisions on data at a corporate level, and why so much money and effort and time is spent, and why data scientist is such a sexy job right now. It's because of the fact that there is no such thing as clean data. And that's what people spend most of their time and money on, is cleaning data. I mean, that's just the nature of the game now. And I've been
So
through.
this goes back to, again, you've mentioned data modeling, and you mentioned the importance, because you keep emphasizing that as it's really, really important at the beginning to think about the architecture, and so you can actually design in your model trying to help keep the data and the database clean, which is one of the reasons that you do it the way that you're doing it.
Yes, and that's why we're extremely strict about that data model, and why we always start there, and why we're very, very thoughtful and deliberate about that data model, and why we're always maybe over engineering the data model. We may not over engineer the API, we may not over engineer the code for simplicity and just getting it out the door, but we will always take that extra time and effort to over engineer the data model, because we know that's where businesses fail, that's where technology fails, that's where you're going to spend most of your time, effort, and money later, is in a bad data model.
Which around data, you hear a lot. I mean, this blockchain technology, it is a future, and so on and so on. Granted, I don't understand what it is. Is it something to do with data, or it's totally different animal? And
Blockchain, the most amazing technology with only one application, with only one true application. And I can say,
yeah, so far that's it.
This is my area of research, actually. So blockchain, it's a buzzword. Blockchain's like AI, like synergy, 1 + 1 = 3. Like all of these just words that mean nothing, right? That's what blockchain is. What blockchain actually is underneath the hood, if someone who's really, serious about blockchain, and knows what they're talking about, what they mean is a decentralized database. That at its core is what blockchain is. And then to add it, and what makes it really blockchain, obviously you can have a decentralized database without blockchain. What makes it really blockchain is cryptography. So you have an added security or cryptographic combination with this that maybe anonymizes it. But you have multiple different types of blockchain. One blockchain you can have is what we call a decentralized ledger, which basically means that everyone has a copy of the data of the database. And then you verify it. Now, can you tell what the data is? Not necessarily, because it's all hashed all the way through, but you can always verify what your entries in that ledger are, right? And then you can also have centralized blockchain, where basically it's a trusted network, or like a private, we call it private blockchain or private network, where there is a centralized version, but they're decentralized in certain ways, right? In maybe application processing or that kind of thing, peering, you'll hear stuff like that. The thing is, blockchain has always been kind of this holy grail or whatever, this touted technology for everything, because privacy is always important, as it should be, and verification is what's key and critical, right? And we have a bunch of actors in the world that don't and shouldn't necessarily trust each other in their dealings, right? Corporations shouldn't. There's a lot of competition. They shouldn't trust each other, but we need verification to move on, right? I mean, we absolutely need it. So we need some way to decentrally verify each other in a way that keeps allowing us to be private in the things we need to be competitive with, but at the same time push forward so that we're moving forward from a product and a culture society perspective. And so blockchain has always been kind of put up on this pedestal because of this decentralized kind of aspect. The issue with blockchain really boils down to two things. The first thing is it is exceptionally complex to implement blockchain. Exceptionally complex. The solution and the concept of blockchain is elegantly simple. It's beautiful. But to actually implement it, the devil's in the details. To really truly implement blockchain societally, like if every single one of us were decentralized, we would have to carry around a database on whatever topic that we're talking about individually, and we'd have to actually store our private keys, our cryptographically signed keys, and know what those are well enough in order to interact with each other in a technology. You think grandma's going to do that? F no, right? There's just no way, right? It's just too complex to do. And there's always someone who's coming out every week. You hear something. It's like, oh, we got the way to do it. No, no, you don't. Like, no one's going to run their own server, right? Because that's what you have to do. You literally have to run. I mean, they literally have to know the stuff that we're teaching you. All the stuff that we're teaching you, you would have to know in order to run your own blockchain, right? I mean, it's truly. Now, the one place that blockchain is amazing and incredible at is the one place that you see amazing and incredible things, and that's cryptocurrencies. Yeah. Because of a shared ledger, right? It's very simple. You have one thing, there's a transaction that occurs, and then you have this transaction. You only need to know who the parties are. You don't even need to know who the parties are. You basically just need to know what value it is at the end, right, of it. Put it in the ledger, and then the next record goes on the top. The problem with like Bitcoin, for instance, is you'll hear about halving and things and how it's unsustainable. It is unsustainable because currently right now, last time I checked, which was probably 6 months ago, the size of the Bitcoin database that you have to carry around is literally 258 gigabytes. I mean, just the blockchain, just the transaction ledger, right? 258 gigabytes. So you basically have to carry on a hard drive everywhere in order to just participate materially if you want to be truly private. So what has happened? Well, you have wallets, right? You have these coin wallets and all of these different things. Well, what's a wallet? Just a bank. You're centralizing, right? So wait a second. Why are we using blockchain then? We're all just centralizing around some wallets. So you'll see, like, even a thing that it's really good for just doesn't really end up making a ton of sense when it comes to convenience and really just operating societally amongst everyone. It's really only good for the people who, like us, really know it, right? Or know enough about the tools to be dangerous in order to actually execute. So that is generally what blockchain is. It's also really popular in supply chain, as you can imagine, right? With decentralization and everything. But once again, the same problem happens. You need something to centralize. So whenever someone comes to me and it's like, hey, we could use blockchain for that, I can say, yes. Do you want to make any money? Yes. Well, then you don't want to decentralize it, right? You want to control it. So why would you intentionally use blockchain, right? So, I mean, there's a significant number of bad things about it. Having spent a lot of time myself implementing blockchain and doing things in blockchain, being a security guy, I love blockchain. I think it's really cool technology, but it's really a solution in search of a problem is really what it comes down to, because the problems are just too complex to actually provide that solution for them. And it really comes down to grandma in the end. She's just not going to be able to use blockchain. And frankly, the kids who are being raised right now in our technology world still are not going to be able to use it. It just takes way too much technology to use it safely, securely, and intentionally.
So I had heard it used for like tracking the quality of parts.
Yeah,
like exactly. That you could that like in a manufacturer who would control the database would say, I'm going to keep the ledger of where everything is gone with these particular parts, so they could track it like we used to do with, or still do with, lot numbers.
Right.
Where you'd have a part and you'd say, okay, what's the lot on it? Well, this they could actually rather than having some computer record someplace, it would be kept in these decentralized. But
why
had somebody just
centralization, right? It's you're basically have a list of vendors, so it's
right.
Kind of like, why do that? Really, it only comes down to, from a supply chain perspective, it comes down to is if you have competing vendors somehow trying to work together, but they don't want you to know anything about each other. But at that point, it's kind of like, well, someone has to know because you're building a product in the end. And it always boils up to that one integrator, basically in the automotive industry, the OEM, who has to know everything anyways. And so the whole thing breaks down because it's just too complex to implement realistically. And the big OEM at top is just going to be like, why do I need all this complexity? I'll just keep my ERP and my procurement system and keep, problem solved. And everyone else is like, yeah, I guess it is solved. And then Gexpro keep getting the contracts and everyone's happy, right?
Yeah.
So I think that's really what it comes down to. So that's my soapbox on blockchain. But yeah, I'm a fan of blockchain, but purely from an academic standpoint, not from a realistic standpoint. Beth Ann knows. She sat through like multiple soapboxes on, I did this whole blockchain thing for Ford actually. Designed this entire blockchain based system basically for Ford. Um, and Ford said they basically looked at it and said, "Wow, that is really cool," and they shelved it. Immediately shelved it.
I really like that concept. Don't
Really,
know how to do that.
that is amazing concept. Okay, put it on the shelf over here.
That is really cool. We have no idea how to do anything with that.
Exactly. But that's how blockchain is. Anything else?
Going back to the prior subject on data being dirty and whatnot, I would say that's another place where third-party services start shining a little bit. So let's say that you're building something and you want the addresses of some users and whatnot. If that's not really what you're interested in solving, if that's not the problem that you really have at hand, but you need to have accurate information to make whatever tool that you're building or system you're building work, that's a good place where you can go to a third party where that is what they're responsible for, right? You go and you subscribe, you get your API keys, and then you hit their APIs to get the relevant data that you need. And so you'll notice, depending upon the system that you're making, that it does become this large integration of different systems, right? And you get to a point where you're trying to focus on what problem you in particular are trying to solve, right? For example, if you need to accept payments, you don't want to build your entire own payment system, right?
Right.
Right. So
Yeah.
Yeah, don't
I mean,
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, exactly. And that's one of the reasons why we're, towards the end of this boot camp, we'll actually do microservices, which you've heard me say that word a lot. And we actually have already developed a microservice. We're just not calling it that, right? These microservices are really all interact via REST APIs, and that's what it comes down to. Is how do you do that, and how do you do it consistently? Um, and this is exactly how you do it. I mean, the way we're doing it, the way we're building a vehicle communicating with our backend, it's the same way that a backend is going to communicate with one of these services JC mentioned, a payment gateway, or some other address cleaning gateway, or ServiceNow, or Salesforce, or any of these other like ERP systems that you might have, or a database, any of those kinds of things. It just ends up being the same thing. It's just a different consumer on the other end. So that's why it's become. That's why we're de-emphasizing the coding a lot in this, and emphasizing the concepts of connection, of connected systems, because what we see out in the industry is just a lack of common sense and simplicity in system architecture. And it's born out of how complex things can be on the surface, and how things just kind of get cobbled together because you don't quite understand the architecture or think holistically. That's why we're trying to de-emphasize the code, emphasize the architecture. So I think that in and of itself is what really what really drives kind of what we've been talking about. As we go forward in all of this, because you're really going to be spending more time configuring and architecting than you are coding. I mean, JC, well, that's probably right now is not a good time because you're actually in the middle of building a brand new system. But we do spend time coding, but we spend a lot of time configuring too.
yeah. I mean, and a lot of the time that you spend is reading documentation of a system that somebody else put together, right? And you could say, well, why am I reading the documentation when I could be building it? And so, well, I mean, you might not want to go down that rabbit hole. So there's a reason people end up paying for these kind of services.
Yeah.
And the neat thing too is nowadays you can get up and running way faster than even 5 years ago, right?
Oh, definitely.
Right. And if you architect your system correctly, you can set it up so that in the future, when let's say you're paying for something that you pay per request, right? Every time a HTTP request goes in, you tick up on your bill. That might be tolerable while you're just getting a proof of concept out of the door. But you can think about it. You can say, well, look, I want to get this thing working within a couple weeks. I don't have time to build this other system. But what I can do is I can set up my interfaces such that when my volume goes up and this actually starts to hurt, if this takes off, then I can roll my own.
Yep. And if I maintain the same contract as that other service, then it'll almost be like I can just kind of section that and focus on that little thing and just drop it in. Just change a webhook or change a URL. I'm good to go.
I mean, a good example, one of the APIs we're working with is Google has a huge set of machine learning models that are already been trained, and they're incredible at doing image recognition, right? And so you can utilize their machine learning models to go and you can let's say you want to detect a school bus, right, in one of your images. And instead of you going through all the time trying to develop and train a model to tell, okay, this is what a school bus is, no, it's not a cat, right? And all that kind of stuff, all you do, take your image, right? You're going to send it up to the Google servers, and they're going to be able to send you the coordinates and the bounding box around that type of an object, right?
Mm-hmm.
And it's those kind of things that'll let you get your stuff to market a lot faster.
A lot faster, and it's very expensive. Cost you like $1 an image or something crazy, but
Yeah.
but it's fine because you know that, hey, I can go train a model. I know how to do that. I don't have time right now because I'm building something else, or that's not what I need to spend time on to get this thing out the door. But I know that I can build it pretty easily once my funding comes or once the revenues start. Whatever it is, there's no reason to spend a bunch of time on something you don't need to.
Yeah. How many payments these days does Stripe process?
Oh, geez,
It's
billions.
pretty.
I mean, probably billions a day.
I think even like don't they even they have some deals with Uber? Like I mean, like even some of the big guys have huge contracts with Stripe. They don't deal with their own payments.
No. Oh, the Stripe. What JC's talking about is Stripe is a payment processor, so they process credit cards, ACH, all those. We use Stripe almost exclusively now. I've used everywhere from WorldPay to Vantiv, which was now for WorldPay. Authorize.net, Chase Banking, all those. Um, but Stripe, 2.9% plus 30 cents. I mean, you can't beat it with the nice developer tools they have and everything. Plus the PCI compliance and all that kind of stuff that they bring. It's just something you use. I mean, it's just not worth rolling your own. Not to mention all the integrations they have with all the other tools that we use. So, and
Yeah, we've got another one we integrated Zoom into even,
we had
right?
a telehealth platform we integrated Zoom into. We weren't going to recreate we had to do it in 4 days, right? No, because of COVID. 4 days, brand new system, ground up. We weren't going to build an entire teleconferencing system in 4 days, right? But Zoom already had it, and they had nice APIs, so we just integrated Zoom. And in 4 days, we had an entire telehealth platform for mental health. So, I mean, it's really just, yeah, you just don't recreate the wheel if you can help it. But like JC said, it's really important if you're going to do something like that and you know it's going to cost you, that you architect so that you can easily replace it when the time comes you need to save some money. It's really easy to do that. But it takes a little extra thought, a little extra foresight to really make sure that you're doing that. And that's one of those things that hopefully when we're going through all this stuff, you kind of start realizing what's under the hood of what they're doing. So you know what to expect when it's kind of like, oh yeah, I know where I need to delineate this. I can't, I know where that boundary wall is, and I'm going to abstract a little bit more than it may look like right now than I should right now, but I'm going to do that because it's going to help me later replace that thing because I know how they built that or whatever. That's why we're going into the details of this, just so you can be exposed to it and understand it. All right, cool. So anything else that we can pontificate about?
Nope. See you Thursday.
Cool. Sounds good. Thanks, guys. We'll see you Thursday. Context and oh man, JC, I do not envy you on Thursday.
Oh, we're gonna do an actual login with our front end this time.
Yeah, I do not.
This is the introduction to deployment.
No, this is we
still...
actually switched the weeks. So I was going to do context first, but I decided to put MQTT first.
Okay.
What I did last week, and then JC volunteered when I was lamenting how much work it was going to be to do context. He was like, "I'll do it." So I was like, "Sure, go for it."
One of the things you'll find on these front end systems is it's a little bit tricky at first to figure out how to get data between your components, and so context is a really nice way to allow you to kind of inject it where you need it.
Yeah, it's going to take everything that we've done. I'm going to move it up a layer, basically, in our front ends.
Cool. Good.
Should be fun.
It will be fun. Okay.
Thanks.
See ya.
Thanks.
Have a good one, guys.
Bye.